Maybe some of you are wondering what the most remarkable part of my 5-week or 4.5 weeks away from the Roman community was. And it was a chance to go away a little bit with my kids. And one of the things that was the most fun for them to do as Rabbi's kids was to get a tattoo in Lake George. I cannot tell you how many tattoos I said no to before they arrived at the safe ones. The eagle on my son Tal's shoulder and the other eagle on my son Bear's shoulder. They had for a moment this prohibition that we as Jews have lived with and that I grew up with, and the taboo has given us that tattoos are taboos. But to these two kids, having that tattoo was everything. It felt somehow it said something. Thankfully, it was only surface and didn't go deeper than that. We'll come back to that too. This Shabbat, we will bless the coming new moon, and on Sunday evening we will usher in Elul, the month of spiritual preparation that precedes the Yamim Noraim, the days of awe. One of the hallmarks of our spiritual process during Elul is a commitment to reflection and introspection, of turning inward to see clearly and vividly the ways we have missed the mark, fallen short, erred, and just plain made a mess. This process, known as tshuva, repentance or returning. Tshuva obligates us to make amends as we seek to repair what we've broken and rent asunder. However, this moral or ethical inventory is not the only work of Elul, not the only work that the tradition imagines we do during these 4 weeks. The Zohar, the 13th century Spanish mystical text, has a radical reading of a challenging part of the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy. In the portion known as Kitisa, a portion that is on the way towards us, we find laws dealing with what is known as Isha Yefat Toar, or the captive woman. The laws are originally the ancient biblical attempt to introduce a moral code to war's savage and brutal nature. The Torah requires that the captive mourn her parents for 1 month. And commenting on that piece of the Deuteronomic law, the mystical Zohar radically reads this way: the woman in the narrative of the Torah is nothing less than the Shekhinah, an allegory for the divine feminine, known by that name. Her captivity means that the Shekhinah is in exile, held captive by all that hides the divine light, and that the month of grief that the Torah mandates is none other than the month of Elul, the month where the Shekhinah longs for release from exile. This reading adds a new valence and texture to the holy work that we'll be doing during the month of Elul. Not only are we involved in moral inventory, but we are involved in the vital work of deepening an awareness of the grief and the pain that there is in the world and within us. Elul itself becomes an 8-leaf coat, a time to grieve. Tomorrow morning's Torah portion has an odd prohibition and an even stranger rabbinic interpretation of that law that sheds some light on the grieving process that Elul ushers us to. In chapter 14 of the book of Devarim, we read as follows: "You are children of the Lord your God, Banim atem ladonai Elohechem. You shall not gash yourselves or shave the front of your heads because of the dead. You are a people consecrated to God, and God has chosen you from among all the people to be an Am Segulah, to be a treasure." The Torah prohibits self-mutilation as a way of expressing extreme grief. This law is an extension of the same prohibition that priests had, but now is extended to all of the people of Israel. You are all priests, says the Torah. You are all holy. Treat your bodies with sanctity. The reasons for this prohibition range from the perceived insult to God if we mourn excessively, or to the affront that the divine gift of a body gives us. The likeliest rationale for these laws is that the Israelite authors saw the surrounding nations exhibiting mourning practices in those ways, and they were an abomination to the Israelite authors. And so they prohibited them. Lo titgodidu, which means do not gash, is a biblical prohibition on being like the rest of these nations. But where the rabbis go with this is remarkable. The rabbis read the word lo titgodidu, which means do not cut, as lo ta'asu agudot. Do not make multiple factions within a community, so that you have one law in one jurisdiction and another law in another jurisdiction. For 1,000 or some odd years, commentators have wondered what is the connection between mourning practices that prohibit cutting and not dividing the body politic into multiple factions. One commentator, however, sees the connection very clearly. He writes, "Do not divide that which is one whole, that which is indivisible. We depend on our bodies to support us, especially when we are grieving a loss. We need our bodies more than ever, and we need our bigger body too. We need the social cohesion that in and of itself allows us to be and feel a part of and not apart from all of life." The month of Elul is a month-long reflection of those parts of our lives that we can change, as well as those parts of our reality that will never change, that will never return until we let them go. And we can't let go of what we haven't grieved, what we haven't integrated and touched. The rabbis connect these two moments to teach us to seek unity and fellowship, and to remember that beneath every veneer, we are all human, we are all children of the one God. I'd like to offer my own interpretation. The connection between the way that we grieve and the way that we gather is simple. It isn't only about division and not dividing what is whole, not taking a body politic or a community and separating it into different factions. It isn't about taking one's own body and separating it in some way, disconnecting from the integrity of the body, but it's something much simpler. The prohibition is against touching the skin, the outer layer of this beautiful body. As if to say that grief happens not on the skin, but underneath it. As if to say that the same way you might mistake someone on the outside by a mark or by some distinguishing element and say, oh, I think I know who they are, but underneath the skin there is something happening that you never know. In the same way that we look out at our fellow brothers and sisters and siblings in the human family and say, oh, we're here and they're there. We haven't gone beneath the skin. The process of bringing about unity within a community and the process of allowing ourselves to feel our full humanity is letting her under our skin. And then we can begin to make it better. The Torah prohibits mourning on the skin. The Torah prohibits, as if to say, that won't get you there. The invitation, of course, is to recognize that there's something deeper in each and every one of us that awaits that moment where we can feel it, we can show it, and we can feel it. And lastly, and this for me is the most important, the reality is that in so many ways, communities in the face of those who hold grief split. We each and every one of us yearn to be in a community that can hold what we bring. Each and every one of us yearns to be integral and part of a community that says, yes, in this space you are witnessed, you are held. As we begin Elul, this coming Sunday, Monday, we begin a month of not only introspection, but also coming to terms with the immensity of what this last year has been for so many of us. None of us thought that a year ago we would still be wearing these masks. None of us thought a year ago that the numbers of our fellow human beings who had passed from this pandemic would be this high. None of us comes in to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur without some holding of grief. And so let it out and let it in so that we can begin to make it better. Dedicate tonight's sermon to a special soul.